Tonight we have Pat and Joann Gallagher as our speakers, and I'm really looking forward to it. They're going to talk about their trip to Ethiopia and show us the photos from that. And there was one other country.
Djibouti.
I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Djibouti.
Okay.
Go with your Djibouti.
All right. Pat and Joann have been members of Salem Audubon since the early 90s, about the same time that I joined. At that time, Jerry Smith was a very active member, one of our charter members, and Jerry did a lot of birding trips, and Pat and Joann were encouraged by him to start doing international birding. And over the years, they have gone on birding trips to 6 different continents, all but Antarctica. In Pat's years with Salem Audubon, he has volunteered at the Audubon Woodshop, where they make kits for birdhouses and other kinds of birdhouses and bat houses. And he's done that for 24 years. He also started the Bluebird Conservation Program, in which he helps people who want to put up bluebird houses, helps them to locate them correctly, and gives them a lot of encouragement with their bluebird program. In the years since he did that, there have been over 2,000 young bluebird fledglings. So Pat and Joann have been on 30 bird tours to 22 different countries. And we'll be able to see 2 of those tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat.
Yes, please. In the back anyway. Or in front. That's good.
Glad that works.
Okay, I'm going to use the microphone. My voice isn't quite what it used to be. Tim's going to get set up here. There are plenty of seats up close. I've got subtitles on the names of the birds and so forth, but this is a smaller screen than I had anticipated, and you may have trouble reading them. So if you want to move forward, now would be the time to do it. Thank Judy for the introduction. She does a lot of things on this just to make this happen. She doesn't only have to find the presenters, she has to schedule them, and she writes the articles for the website and the newsletter and so forth. And when she called me, she asked me a couple of things I didn't know. I didn't know how many countries I had been to birding. I didn't know how many trips I'd been on. And while I was getting statistics, I thought, well, how many presentations have we done? And I think this is the 11th presentation we've done to Birders Night. I know this is the 8th one on PowerPoint. They're easy to count because they're still in this computer, but we had a couple before with the old technology of slides and slide projectors. Some of you remember that. At any rate, it's been about 11 of them. Okay, this is a trip we did in 2017. We're not really delaying showing this program. Eugenia Becker asked us to do this program probably in 2018. But with health problems and with COVID coming up and so forth, we just weren't able to get it until now. So we had to remind ourselves a little bit about what we had seen there. Also, I want to recognize a special guest tonight that's here from Beaverton. Mark Miller, sitting at the table over here, has traveled with us on 3 of our trips. We met him in India, to a trip in Inner Mongolia and China, and then a trip down around the tip of South America. And we've enjoyed traveling with him very much. I appreciate him being here tonight. He's on the way. He's closing out a house sale in Montclair, Colorado, and moving to Beaverton. So he's in the middle of moving. I wanted to get a map to show you roughly where we're going to Ethiopia and Djibouti. This map caught my attention because it's a colonial map. It shows the countries of Europe that were colonial powers. Map was made. And you can see that it is colorful. Everything was colonized except two countries. That's Ethiopia in the, oops. Here we go. This is Ethiopia in the gray over here. You notice it's a landlocked country. It's surrounded by Italian colonies in the north, Eritrea now, and then Somalia down below. The only other country that has not been colonized in there is way over here on the left side, a little bitty Liberia. And Liberia escaped because the United States government bought it for free slaves, a place that they could go and be back in Africa. And so they bought it, and so it was never colonized. But those are the only two places, which is kind of amazing. Europe really took it over a lot like we took over Indian lands here. A map to give you a little better idea here of Ethiopia. Sure keeps disappearing. Is surrounded by country. It's landlocked. This is Eritrea up here. It's a dictatorship. It's not a very nice place. Djibouti, we'll talk about a little bit later. And then Somaliland is in here someplace now on a more recent map, and then Somalia around the corner of the Horn. It's pink because a lot of the Somali people are immigrating into Ethiopia. Somalia is such a war-torn and drought and famine-stricken country that people are leaving, and poor people, they've only got their feet to leave with, so they're leaving and setting up farms in Ethiopia. Ethiopia, size-wise, is 426,000 square miles. That makes it about 4.5 times the size of Oregon. We've got a population of 5 million in our state. If we had a state that was 4.5 times bigger, we'd have 22 million in population. Ethiopia has 122. It is a very populous country, one of the more populated countries in the continent of Africa. I want to show you a little bit of our route here. I didn't stick to it exactly, but Addis Ababa is there in the middle. There was a pre-tour of 4 days to a World Heritage Site called the town of Lalibela, as it's noted for its stone-carved churches. And we did that, and it's not on this map, but it's roughly in here. We'd had to take an airplane ride to get to it, and we'll get into that, the first part. The second part of the trip was roughly 2 or 2.5 weeks of a trip of bird watching trip with Ethiopia, or with rock jumper out of South. Pretty much. Obviously, I'm not familiar with Tim's machine here, but anyway, we'll get it going. The cursor keeps disappearing. There we go. Addis Ababa is right in the center, and you can see all these mountain ridges around here. It's a very, very mountainous country. Addis Ababa, for instance, is almost 8,000 feet elevation, and much of the country is as well. We spent most of our time south of Addis Ababa, including just a few miles away from the Kenya border on the way south. Lalibela. This is probably the most iconic church of the group. There are 11 churches that are carved out of stone. And this one is the one that gets pictured most because it's really striking. Now, what we've got here, this was a big basalt monolith, and they not only dug the hole, but they left what was left of and made the church. You'll notice it looks like it's a masonry church. It's got square corners. It's symmetrical and so forth. They don't know who the architect was or how they really did it, but this was done in the late 12th century, early 13th century. It's a long time ago. techniques for doing this type of work were pretty primitive. They say it's a soft type of basalt, but it's still basalt. It still has weathered all these years. Well, these people are all around the edge there because they're having a mass at the church. And unfortunately, because they were celebrating some holidays, religious holidays, we were not able to get into this church. We were in some of the others, and I'll show them. But at any rate, the people mainly are on the outside of the church because there's not much room in the inside. It's pretty tight. Room for the priests and usually a small chorus and maybe a few musical instruments, but that's about it. This is another one. This one's had some damage from the weather and so forth. You can see that these uprights here are more modern. They're ripped masonry just to shore up the building and put the tower over it, the roof over it. There are 11 of these churches. They are all active churches. They have never stopped being active churches since the 12th century. You see, we're in a pretty deep pit going down to the base just to get into one of the churches. There usually is a very narrow, one or two people wide path to get into the basement, the lower level. The inside is carved in many of these. This is granite that they have carved into this intricate pattern. They've added paint in recent years to spiff it up a bit, but it is still spectacular. They have minimal lighting in them. There's usually a few bare light bulbs, and that's about it. Just enough that the priest can have their service, and also for the few tourists that show up here. All of them are in solid rock. Some of them are built into the cliffs. This is a way we had to hike. There was a ways to get in there, kind of a rough path. Not quite so fancy as the other churches, but the inside is carved just about the same space. Now, these more remote churches, there are usually a priest in each one of them, and he usually lives with his family inside the church. Really pretty primitive, but that's his job. Coming out is kind of rough. We got walking sticks and hiking boots, but this young lady here, you can see in the pink dress, if I can find her, the pink dress, was hired by our guide to help give a hand to some of the people working their way out of there. She was only 12 or 13. She didn't have hiking boots on. She had little jelly shoes. She was amazing. She did a great job. One day we walked out on the main street of town and we were faced with this crowd coming toward us. We didn't know if it was a protest or what. As it turned out, it is a holiday, religious holiday. So these are the priests that are in the fancy vestments and even fancier umbrellas, marching toward the church with the people that are going to attend the church. Now you'll notice that although it's fairly fancy there, they've got sneakers on their feet. They're Nike runners. They're just as modern in their footwear as we are. Now you'll notice a couple of them look like they're carrying canes. Those are not canes. Those are the antithesis of canes. If you go to church in our country, you might be there an hour, maybe two, and you're sitting most of the time. These services, there are no pews in these churches, even if you get inside them. And the services last 8 hours from start to finish, no breaks, nothing. And these priests have to stand up. So those are leaning sticks. They put them under their arm so they can lean on it to get a little bit of different posture support. One more that is open on the front, but it was also carved out of a monolith. You can see that down here, there are people inside because they have to leave their shoes outside. And how many hundreds of thousands of hands have made that mark on that entry? Another one still. This one also has some support hoops added for on the right side there. You can see that the masonry, but at any rate, it's still active. Inside the church is the priest. There's always somebody in there watching things. He's showing us the religious book made out of vellum, leather, and the crown on his head. Both of those things are probably 500 or 600 years old. And although the government of Ethiopia encourages the church to get replicas and so forth, they refuse to do that. This is part of their faith. And unfortunately, they do have a lot of theft from these facilities. We did do bird watching in Lalibela. Not the most handsomest bird, but a big bird. He's 4 feet tall. Pretty tolerant of us. I don't know if this shows up very well. I guess it does. Little bittern. I'd like to see it next to our American bittern. I suspect it'd be pretty close to the same size. This has got a family name that you may not be familiar with, gray-backed fiscal, Fiscal. But if you look at the birds, the coloration and so forth, you might be able to tell that this is part of the shrike family, extended part, they're cousins. Back in Addis Ababa, we were staying at an older hotel called Hotel Gian, and it had probably the best green spot in Addis Ababa. It's got 10 or 15 acres of landscaped lawn that they water. They have quite a few trees, mostly native, but also some exotics. Some of the best bird watching we had was on the hotel grounds. Now, we had different times coming and going and so forth, so we took advantage of it, going out and looking. Now, this grounds is also known for weddings. On some days, they have civil weddings in here, maybe 100 a day. It is such a popular place for the Ethiopians to get married. On the ground, there are a few rough spots, including a stream running through there. This is an endemic bird, which is marked by the E after the name. I've got a few more coming up. So that was a bird that you can only see in Ethiopia. Another one, it's endemic, a brown-rumped seed eater, pretty common bird at this particular location. Malachite kingfisher is a very common bird in most of Africa, but it's a very beautiful bird. Just go close. Hadada ibis. These are everywhere. We originally saw them in South Africa, but they're in many places in Africa. They're very loud, noisy. They like cities. They pick up a lot of garbage. Now this bird, I took this picture and selected this picture actually because I had a bunch of pictures of this bird, but most of them were showing the garbage that is in the little stream on the hotel grounds. That's kind of typical in Africa. Most streams are garbage pits, and unfortunately, I didn't want you to have to look at that. So I found this picture that was mostly cleaned up. They're very loud. This picture I wish was blown up more, but it's a glossy ibis. And this one, of course, you can find in the east coast of the US, but you can see it's got a very long bill. It's very much like our white-fronted or white-faced ibis. Not a bird. Didn't see a lot of these, and we didn't see any of them being used for hauling things, which we have in other countries of Africa. Our guide thought that these were probably going to be raised as racing camels for the Saudis, which is just north of Ethiopia. And that's a big market for camels. Joann says that they eat cow meat in this area. I don't know that we had any though. So this is a white-bellied bustard. The bustard family, they're all large birds. This one's about 3 feet tall, probably. The largest in the family is the great bustard in Eurasia. It's considered the heaviest flying bird, 45 pounds, it still flies. So pretty good size. We'll see more of bustards here too. It's another endemic bird, a little brown job, Ankober Saren. Ankober is a region in Ethiopia. Saren is a family I wasn't familiar with. So I looked it up and I realized this particular bird is no longer in the Saren family. They took him out about 10 years ago and put him in the Carduelis finch family, the same as our goldfinches and pine siskin. So he's been moving around, but his scientific name now is Carduelis serini. White-headed buffalo weaver. I'm surprised I got one picture of just one bird because they come in flocks. They're very noisy, and they remind me kind of the pinyon jay of Central Oregon, where they just show up. There's a bunch of them, but they just show up and they wander around a lot, but very, very striking in appearance. This is a back view of a white-bellied go-away bird. It's the name of the family is pronounced differently. I've been told it's Turako, but I say Turako. At any rate, it's common bird, usually in flocks. And the name go away is from its call. It's go away, go away. So it's onomatopoetic. I only have one picture of small town life in Ethiopia and Djibouti, but I wanted to point something out because this is the same in all these little towns. Every little town you see is just like this. First of all, they're all retail shops, just a mall. I mean, you can, that particular row of shops has blankets, cooking pots, clothing. There's rugs in front of it here. And they say that 90% of sales of things sold in Ethiopia and most of Africa is from these shops. Now they do have shopping malls in the very bigger towns like Addis Ababa, but they're a minor sales point. These are where the people buy things. So that's pretty typical. The other thing you'll notice that in the front here and on the side, there's a bunch of boards laying on the ground down here. That's covering a ditch. Why do they need a ditch in a big dry country like this? Well, a couple of couple months out of the year, they get monsoon rains here, and they'll get maybe 12 inches a day, or in a big rainstorm. So they have to have some way to get rid of it. And that's pretty typical in this part of Africa, is to have some kind of drainage. They don't want people falling in it, so they cover them up more or less. The other thing you'll notice is I'm standing to take the picture on a asphalt road, and most of the main roads are paved roads because they're very reliant on trucking to bring their goods in, and they couldn't have a bad road particularly, and they need that. But notice the side street, that's a dirt road, and that's the typical thing that you see in these towns. They do not pave the side streets, and they're just dirt mainly. Sometimes there's gravel, but usually not. The other thing you'll see along the street here is on this right side, you see this row of fencing along here. There are nice houses behind those fences, and to protect them, they all have fences. I mean, they protect themselves. It's just standard to have fencing to keep people out because it is a problem in a highly populated area. Now you'll notice back here, there's a water tank on the top of a building. Here we go. There's water in the city, it's pumped, but there's no pressure to it. If you want pressure, you provide your own tower tank. And that's very typical in these small towns as well. Finally, this unfinished building, very typical. You see a lot of buildings that are in the stages of being built, but have been basically look like they're abandoned. I understand that financing is really a big problem in these African countries. If you're a big international company coming in to build a Hilton, you bring your financing with you and you do the whole project. Here, the banks and local lenders don't have that kind of money and don't trust these builders. So they give partial loans, so they build when they have money and then don't when they don't. And so you'll see this, it might take a decade or better to finish buildings. Don't know what the flowers are, but they're very pretty. This was a picture we took in the bus. You can see the reflection at the top there. I just wanted to show this farmhouse. Happened to be a farmhouse all by itself, which was kind of unusual. Usually there's a grouping of farmhouses, but this one just had one. And I wanted to point out the piles of dung. That's their fuel. So the women, and it's always the women, have to go out and collect this dung, come back, sit down, make patties the size that they want for their ovens or their stove. And this is how they store them. They just stack them up, and then when they get so much, they put a smooth cover on the top to keep the rains off of it. The problem with this is it provides fuel for them, but it does not provide natural fertilizer for their fields, and their fields are in terrible shape. They've really overgrown, and so you can't use the fertilizer for two things. You can only use it for one or the other. This is another farm scene. The main grain that's grown is a high elevation grain. It's an ancient variety called teff, T-E-F-F. It's used to make breads and so forth, just like our wheat and so forth, but it's much smaller than a wheat would be. I'm told it's about the size, a teff grain is about the size of a poppy seed. So they don't get a lot of production. They have to do a lot of it, but In this particular field, they're winnowing it to separate the chaff from the teff. And that's quite a process. This is January, February. They've probably been doing this for several months, and they want to get done before the rains. Question, is this an eagle's nest? No, it's not. We looked at that and thought, what's going on? Well, those are corn stalks. And these farmers don't have any way to store this to keep their animals out. So this was one way to do it, put it up in the tree. We saw quite a few of these. I don't know if this was one year's crop or if they just put it aside as they had a shortage of food, but at any rate, that was pretty common to see that. Abyssinian ground thrush, a lot of thrushes in the world, and we'll see quite a few tonight. Abyssinian is an old word for Ethiopian, so you will see that as well. Species that were named before it became Ethiopia have the Abyssinian name, and they've kept it. Up in the wooded areas, and there are a few, you see this. It's a problem. The habitat is being degraded because 122 million people need fuel and need crops and so forth. This lady with 3 horses, I suspect she's not a farmer and probably is hauling it to be sold, hauling this wood to be sold. Just by the fact that she's got 3 horses means that she's probably not a farmer, but farmers seldom have 3 horses. You can notice that on the top of the middle one is a saddle. So she rides one way, not the way home. One of our first stops was at a nature lodge, and we stopped and they said, sorry, you can't stay. We had an earthquake last night and the water system broke. So we stayed for lunch, and these were the guys that we watched during lunch. It was just a tree outside. We had an open bush that we had the lunch at, and just watching these guys lazing around, called us monkeys. We ran into lots of herds of animals. We've got a goat herd there on the right. There's probably 3 or 4 here. Now, goat is the #1 meat eaten in the world. Beats cows, pigs, everything. It's a huge market. And so these are mainly meat goats. I suspect they might get some milk off of some of them, but these goats are in such bad shape that they let them have their kids, and the kids get the milk and eat it. We saw a cow herds about the same size, 300 or 400, and that was huge. They do the same thing. They just take them along and let them munch whatever they can find. So it's no wonder there's nothing left. Egyptian geese with their significant eye patch that they've got, that's easy to recognize them. Got a couple of young ones between them. I don't know what's behind there. I think it's a grebe or something. And every time we stopped, kids were there. You didn't see a village, you didn't see anything, but you get out of the bus, there's a bunch of kids. So I think in this particular case, we had stopped and had eaten our lunch. And generally the practice was we had more lunch than we could eat. So we'd give what we didn't eat to the driver, and then he'd try to parcel it out in a fair way. And the kids were always glad to get it and so forth, but otherwise they weren't begging. The only problem we had was if we stopped for a bush break and so forth, men going off one way and women going off the other way, the kids just followed. So we had to work out a deal where the men would discourage them, or rather, while the women went off, and then vice versa, the women would try to distract them while the men went off. There's some a little bit older kids that were watching us one day, and I was just standing there, and I just thought, well, hello. And the girl on the right, taller girl, said hello back in English. So I said, do you speak English? And she said, yes. And I said, well, why aren't you in school? And she said, well, we went this morning. And I later found out that there is double shifting in most of the areas for school. Ethiopia has the highest literacy rate in all of Africa. Very, very popular for providing and going to school. And she went in the morning, and some of the other kids went in the afternoon. So I asked her, what language is your school teaching her? And the tall girl, both girls actually, the one on this one and this one, both answered immediately and said, the language was Amharic, A-M-H-R-I-C, Amharic. That's an ancient language. About a half of the Ethiopians still speak that language as their primary language. Now, I talked to Judy and I unfortunately told her something that was incorrect. I want to correct that. I mentioned that Amharic was what Christ was supposed to have spoken. It's a similar related language called Aramaic that was from the Galilee. So I want to correct that. It's equally as old as Amharic, and there might have been some interchange. They probably could read or speak a little bit of each to each other, but it's not the same. So anyway, she said they teach in Amharic, but she's learned English. I suspect her family must speak English. Perhaps her father or mother might have a government job or something that would require it. But these are vultures, white-backed vultures. There's only a couple of them that are obviously adult. One in the middle left and one in the upper right back here. One right in the back might be as well. Most of the others are juveniles. There's not many messes left in Africa. It gets pretty well eaten up. Somali ostrich. Now, most of you know that the field guides, the order of the field guide from front to back generally is the oldest evolutionary forms in the front of the book and then evolutionary forms in the back of the book. Well, in the Horn of Africa book that we were using, this guy's on page 1. He's very old, very ancient species. Another Abyssinian guy, Abyssinian roller. Very, very attractive flying particularly. We stopped along the road one day and saw this Liechtenstein's sand grouse on her nest right by the road. So we stopped, but it startled her a little bit. So she got up and started to walk away, and she had 2 chicks under her. This is one you can see. This one down here is really in the shade. You can't see it very well, but there are 2 chicks. Now the mother has a beautiful pattern, but look at Papa. He's really striking. I might point out that some of these better pictures are not mine. We're not photographers, and Rock Jumper gave us some stock photos for birds from Ethiopia, including this one. Not the best picture, but it's a black-chested snake eagle, fairly common. These are farm fields. We're there in January and February, which is fallow time. I don't know what kind of crop they grew on these, whether it was corn or teff or whatever. But I looked at it and it looks like the rocks, particularly up in here, follow the contour of the land. They're probably property markers, but I suspect also they are erosion control for when it does rain in the monsoon season. And they want to stop that rain and get it to soak in the ground, not run off and cause erosion. So I suspect it's probably multiple, but you can see a lot of rock walls out there. There's village homes over here and inside the trees. There are quite a few. So there's more people living here than you might think. There's a beautiful waterside bird, the African pied wagtail. They do wag their tails. And everything that's standing plant-wise has thorns. Otherwise it'd be eaten. And this is, I think, possibly an acacia tree, but just look at those thorns. Just absolutely amazing what they have to put out to protect themselves. Here's another thorny one, but this one's an invasive plant from Mexico. We found it several places. It's the prickly poppy, but it's Mexican. So it probably is doing okay because it's got thorns and it doesn't mind bad soil. It's perfect for Ethiopia. This beautiful animal, I just love those horns with the curve in them out in Nyala. Another Abyssinian guy, the Abyssinian owl. Could be a super long-eared owl here, huh? There's a raven that is very unique. It's got a white cap in the back of its head, but look at that beak. It's just a huge, huge beak. Don't know what it's for. I don't know if it serves any purpose for what it eats or not. I don't know enough about it, but it's huge. Rivet monkeys are pretty much everywhere that we were anyway, and they are a problem. They don't mind coming in and stealing things. And so the nature lodges and places, the places you eat are covered pavilions where there's no walls. So these monkeys can get in. So on the wall, and almost every one of them is a big stick. That's the monkey stick that you might need to scare off one of these monkeys. Another kingfisher species, a pied kingfisher. Seems like its bill is longer to the body than ours are. It seems like it's out of proportion, but. Superb starling family is amazing. We're only used to the European starling, and although it has pretty colors if you get it in the right light, there's a lot of them in the family that are just striking. It's like this guy. And this is the rock jumper photo. This is not mine. Now there are endemic species other than birds. This is a baboon that lives at about 10,000 feet elevation, and it's only found in Ethiopia. It's a gelada baboon. This is Papa. They were pretty taller than others. They're taking pictures. This is Mama and a couple of youngsters. I don't know what they find to eat up there. You can see they're scraping away. But we're up in the mountains. I mean, this is the same location. We're looking back over the cliff and trying to find a few things. And you notice we've all got our coats on. It is cold up there. We're probably at 10 to 12,000 feet maybe. But look at this valley. Can you imagine the monsoon rain dumping in 12 inches a day or more in here? I mean, it just goes straight down. It's just flash flood time. The African scops owl, scops family of owls is pretty big. There's a lot of different types of scops owls, usually a smaller variety of owl. Another bustard. This one's even bigger. This was a Cory bustard. They can fly, but they really are searching on the ground for things to eat, lizards and whatever. The northern white-crowned shrike. Now here's a handsome fellow, Besa oryx. A nice face pattern and beautiful horns. Even the body is sleek looking. This guy's not quite so handsome. The slender-billed starling female. Just another scenery shot. You can see that we're at about, I think we're probably about 14,000 feet at this level. And you see there is some shrubbery growing and so forth, but that's about it. But up here lives the Ethiopian wolf. And you'll say he looks like a coyote, but he's really much taller, much longer. And look at that snout, that long snout. He's just a bigger version. He is a canis species, a dog species, just like the coyote is, but they prefer to call him a wolf. Doesn't predate cattle or anything. He's basically looking for what I'm going to show you next, which is a giant mole rat. That long snout, he sticks in the burrows and catches these things and pulls them out. We watched him do it. It was one right by the road. That's a giant mole rat. I didn't get a picture of the one he caught because he immediately chewed it in half and swallowed half of it and then worked on the other half. But these are big. They're probably twice the size of our gophers, at least. There's another species of rat that is also found there that they do eat too. I don't know what that one's called. Another iconic species of Africa is the secretary bird. And Joanne's going to have a tell about our sighting of the secretary bird in a few minutes. Here's somebody looking back at us. Don't know what kind of bat he is, but wide awake. Northern red-billed hornbill. I think there are 9 species of hornbill in Ethiopia. We saw 7 of the species, so we had a pretty good sampling. They, of course, can fly as well, but they're really ground feeders. I like the hornbills when they do fly because their wings are, I don't know if they don't have enough feathers or whatever, but when they fly, you can hear them go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh with every wing beat. It's amazing. You can tell they're coming. The meals out on the road, our drivers provided the cooking. And a fairly small group. I think there were just 7 or 8 of us, plus the guide and 2 drivers. Now, these are juvenile pink-backed pelicans. They're not very pretty as juveniles, and even the adults don't look very pink, but that's the species the inland species that they have. I put this in here to remind myself to tell you how rocky and dusty Ethiopia is. It's very hard walking out off the road because of these rocks. These rocks are exposed by the monsoon. The monsoon, beats down and runs off the dust and so forth, leaving the rocks in place. But these are dormant trees. They'll come green when after the monsoon rains come. But the rocks never seem to go away. And the dust was a problem. We all had respiratory problems, coughing and hacking. I got quite sick toward the end of the trip. It was just a problem. Little rock thrush, the thrush family, rather. This was kind of an amazing thing. We were staying at what I would call a resort for several nights. And across the road was this huge facility. This is the world's largest cut rose farm in the world. This is only one of their facilities. They've got another one a few miles away, so it's huge. Every day they send 3 to 5 million cut roses to Europe on a big jet every day of the year. Now it's of course a huge employer in town. They say they don't pay any more than anybody else in town, pretty much prevailing wages, but they provide 2 things that the employees really crave and like. They have on-site medical clinic and they have a school for the kids. So it's a popular place to work for those 2 reasons, if nothing else. I wish these guys were going the other direction, but they weren't. That's my only picture I got of Somalia gazelle, a new species for me. I'd never even heard of it until we took this picture. You want to guess why this guy got his name? Fairly common finch species. It's got a funny name, Baglefect weaver. It's one of the weaver birds. They make the hanging nests that wave in the wind. Baglefect was given the name by a French naturalist who said he heard the name of it from somebody speaking Amharic, the local language. So it isn't known whether that was a description of the sound or whatever. It's an ancient word, was named in the early 1800s, I believe. So we don't know. Anyway, Baglefect is the name. Banded barbettes, they're very small, but very loud. You can always tell when they're around. They're always calling at the top of the tree. Walking cliff chat. Ran into these guys in a national park there, the Wash National Park, probably 10 feet long or so. They're the Nile crocodiles. This is fresh water. So we had kids when we stopped before, but now we've got a group of men coming up. Now what's going on here? Well, that's our vehicle, and the pickup and behind is our chase vehicle with luggage. And we've stopped. And these birding trips have birds that you can't find anyplace else. And if they don't find them for their group, it's a loss. The trip is a total loss by the estimation of some birders. So they fudge a little bit, and they'll call ahead and have somebody local find this roosting bird, have it located for us when we get there so we don't waste time trying to find it. And so the guy on the left with the binoculars around his neck was called the night before, and he'll be paid for doing this. And he went out and found where the birds were doing their day roosting and said he'd meet us. Well, these other guys, I mean, they're kind of envious, I think, of him making money doing this, and that's fine. The birding companies want the local people to realize that bird tours can create jobs and give them something else to do. So they're all listening here. But before I move on to the next slide, I want you to look at the faces of these men. They don't look like the black faces south of here in Kenya and south. And the reason for that is they're so close to the Arabian Peninsula for millennia, the genes have mixed. They are part Arabs, basically, as well as the Negroid. That's why they look different. The binoculars, incidentally, were not really his until they were just given to him by somebody in our group, just as a gift. So they've moved us out into the grove where the bird is, and we're in the front here. You can barely see us. There's so many people watching us, but there's a bird up in the tree. And what bird was worth all the trouble?
Yeah.
So spectacular. He's got, you can see his eyelashes there. He's got they're fleshy eyelashes. His bill matches. And it looks like he just got out of the salon with that hairdo.
Yeah.
Just a gorgeous bird. He's got an interesting name, doesn't he? Prince Rispoli's Turco. It's only found in 3 groves of trees in Ethiopia. It's very rare. There's only a couple hundred birds left. Well, and Prince Rispoli was a nobleman from near Florence. His father had a principality. Most of you probably know that Italy didn't really become a country until about 1875. Before that, it was a whole bunch of little principalities. And so this was a son of the prince in this principality near Florence. And there were collectors and naturalists out of this group. They were the highest educated people in their area. They had time and they had money. And so they would go on these collection trips. And this guy was going to this bird. He collected it. He collected it the same way John J. Audubon did with a shotgun, and stuck it in his collection bag and took off. 4 days later, they had an elephant blocking their path. So Rispoli said, well, I'll get my shotgun out here and just shoot at it and scare it away. Well, the elephant didn't like that, ran up there, grabbed Rispoli with his trunk, threw him on the ground and tromped him to death. No more Prince Rispoli. Well, the collection bag did make it back to Italy, and other people were looking at it and said, yeah, this is a new species, but where did it come from? Because Rispoli had made no notes, absolutely no notes on where he collected it or what kind of tree or time of day or anything that would help people try to find it again. It was a good 10 or 15 years before it was found, apparently, and matched up with the record that Rispoli had started, so they named it for him. So that's what happened to Prince Rispoli. This is a pretty rail. Look at those feet. That middle toe has got to be 3 inches long. It's just huge. Now, Rouget is another naturalist, but this one's from France. It's an endemic bird, the blue-winged goose, obviously named. They're endemic, the white-winged swallow. Beautiful bird, black crowned crane. They're just so elegant. Black-winged lovebird. I was surprised to see these guys there because I think of parrots and parakeets as being in more tropical, wet areas, but this is as dry as can be. And named bush shrike. Wattled ibis. You can see his wattle just barely under his chin there. I can't get, just this little dangly thing is the wattle. It's a piece of flesh. That's what he's named for. This was the bird that was in the kestrel, I believe, the Harwood's francolin, another endemic bird. I think Harwood was British. Hughland's courser, three-banded courser, beautiful pattern on the breast of this bird. They're much bigger and they just stand around a lot. They must have a diet that allow them to do that. I don't know what they eat, but maybe lizards or something, but they don't seem to be real active. You see them standing around quite a bit, but a beautiful bird. Yellow-fronted parrot. I always say fronted, that means right in front of the eyes, basically above the bill. That's what they mean by fronted. It's another endemic, Stressman's bush crow. Stressman was a German naturalist. Now this guy is more widespread than the Turako. We were just driving along and all of a sudden there was a village with a junction to the left. And so we just stopped there and they were in these trees right along the highway. Greater blue-eared starling. Another member of the starling family. That finished the part for Ethiopia. We're going to do a little bit on Djibouti. And Djibouti, again, is right here. Ethiopia is 4.5 times bigger than Oregon. Djibouti is 1/10 the size of Oregon, so maybe Harney County. But it has quite a variety of terrain. It's, of course, at the ocean because it is a major port. Starts from sea level and goes up to probably 7,000 or 8,000 feet at least in the mountains. Now, Djibouti is kind of interesting. It's such a small country, but it has 5 foreign military bases located in their territory. It was a French colony until 1991, I think, when it was given its independence. So France still has a base there, a military base. And Italy, which was the colonial power in Eritrea and Somalia, presence in the area, they also still have a military base there. And you won't be surprised to hear the US has a base there, but we've got bases in 85 countries. So it's not unique for us. They say that it's a mixed group. There's 4,000 or 5,000 Americans there. It's a mixture of Naval, Army, Air Force, and Coast Guard. Quite a mix. The last 2 of the 5 are real surprises to me. They're the only, these bases that they have are the only foreign bases they ever have had. Japan is one, they are there. And the last one is China. And this is its only permanent foreign base. Is the port of entry for Ethiopia. They have a huge volume of traffic, trucks and rail traffic. Ethiopia really relies on it, and Djibouti, of course, collects a lot of transit fees. That's how they make their money. It's very French still in Djibouti. French is one of the main languages. You can still find French wines and foods, but it is a mixture. It's mostly a Muslim country, but like cosmopolitan. So when we landed, we went to, we went birding when we went there we flew into there from Addis Ababa. This was a greater flamingo. I've never seen one flying like that. That's my picture, believe it or not. And you can see the Arabian Peninsula across the way. It's a very narrow place. Caspian terns are found pretty much everywhere, and they have them as well along the Gulf of Eden. Red gull. First night we were there, we were in a 2-star Hilton. Okay, no problem. Second night we were in a cabin like this. And we had driven to a mountainous area basically to look for our target bird because there's only one endemic bird in Djibouti. This was not the cabin we stayed in. There's one next to us that actually was where we were, but pretty primitive. Dirt floors and chaise lounge with a bug net and one sheet, no pillow. Not very, very comfortable at all. We looked at this location and Found a few birds, the Hemprich's hornbill. And the Eurasian hoopoe. I've just been told tonight it's pronounced a little different than that, but it's a favorite bird of Joann and I. We've seen it in India and Europe and Africa. It's quite striking. It is a parasitic bird. That means it lays its eggs in other birds' nests, so it's probably not popular with everybody. But those wings, watch this. When there's a next picture is not from Ethiopia. It's taken by a friend of ours in Scandinavia. Just spectacular when you get the right light. Gone to a second village, and this was where we stayed the second and third, or the third and fourth night. We had a little trouble locking the door. This was an improvement. It had a cement floor, so it wasn't dirt anyway, but pretty much the same type of thing inside. Now there's only 5 of us in this extension to Djibouti, our guide plus 5 clients, and we had 2 drivers and 2 vehicles. The guide who made the arrangements and so forth, and he brought all the food with him. So the local guys cooked French food for us, and we had French wine, and it was a pretty good spread considering where we were staying. But he had to bring it in coolers, otherwise we would have been eating something we didn't want probably. So the bird we were looking for is this guy, the Dijibouti francolin. It's a grouse-side bird. We've seen a couple of francolins before, the Harwood's francolin, for instance. And it's the only endemic bird in Ethiopia. It's the only reason for bird watchers to really go there, because you can see in the countries around it. We didn't see it very well, though. This is a picture from the internet because we didn't have time to hardly get binoculars on it, much less the camera. We'd looked for it the day before, the first day we got there, I guess, and they couldn't find it. So the next morning we were out by the parking lot, and the guide said, well, I can hear him coming. Well, where he was hearing was over the edge of the parking lot, which was on a cliff, and it was like 50 feet down. There was like a 2-foot railing there, and we looked down there, and up there's fog down there. We couldn't see a thing. Pretty soon they hopped out of the fog, and we got to see the birds. It was not very good. Joann's got another, we'll tell you a little bit about that as well, and her experience in seeing that bird. But that's the only endemic in Ethiopia. So a female Somali starling, they come in all varieties of colors and shapes and so forth. Djibouti's pretty. It's got some very nice scenery. Very rugged though. Should have blown it up a little bit more. A little ringed plover. Migratory bird. A few lizard species. This one is just a common agama. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joann. She's got a few more slides and some stories to tell.
So one of the main dishes of Ethiopia is injera, which is made from the teff grain, which was, the little grains are about 1 millimeter in diameter, and it's ground into a flour. It's kind of a grayish color. And so what they do to make injera is to take the flour, they mix it with water, a little bit of salt, and then you let it open ferment like sourdough for about 3 days. And that in part, if you leave it longer, it'll be more sour and less, of course, less flavor. So they make this thin batter, start at the outside on a griddle, and they go in circles and just keep filling it in until they've filled in usually quite a large piece. And it starts to bubble on the top, and you can see the bubbles in part of it. And then at that point, they put a lid on it and it steams a little bit, and then they pull it off. So it's served with tibs, which is meat, very little meat, I might add, and usually very tough, and then mostly vegetables. And a lot of it is flavored with a special mix of spices called bibera, which is paprika and peppers and cinnamon. And there's some variations of it, but it usually has like 8 to 10 different spices. And then you eat by taking a piece of the injera pancake off on the side. You use your fingers, you use it to grab a little bit of the food and then the felt toppings, and then you pop it into your mouth, trying not to touch it because often you're sharing this with other people and you never lick your fingers. So anyway, as you go around, you eat most of the pancake part, and then the part in the middle with all the juices in it is kind of, like the special part. It was okay for a few times, but got a little boring after a while. And in the process of eating there, the food was pretty scant in most places, and both Pat and I lost about 10 pounds apiece. So I need another little trip to Ethiopia to help me along with losing some weight. But it's pretty rough travel. So they also don't use pork or shellfish because of religious reasons. There's Ethiopian Orthodox, Islam, and Jewish religion. So, and goat is the most common meat that's used. Coffee, Pat and I, neither one of us drank coffee, but supposedly the legend is that coffee was discovered by a goat herder. His goats would eat the berries and then they'd become more energetic. And so I guess some monk supposedly brewed some up, and then it moved to Arabia, and now everybody all over the world drinks coffee, except for us. Djibouti, the foods are influenced by the Somalis, Yemeni, and the French. Most of our food was taken, as Pat said, so we didn't experience restaurants or things too much, except for one special dinner. We went out to a restaurant, and I'm not particularly fond of fish. I usually like it okay when it's served to me, but if I have a choice between beef or chicken or whatever, I'm not going to choose fish. So I was kind of like disheartened. Well, okay, we're going to eat. I go into the restaurant, and I'm not sure what all the conversation or process was, but we were ushered into a little room off of the kitchen that had 2 big freezers in it. And they opened them up and they started pulling big fish out. And this really didn't appeal to me. And I'm going, well, are we supposed to choose one or whatever? But anyway, I just kind of backed off. And in the end, they brought fish to the table. Each of us, 2 of us would share a fish. And it was excellent. I really liked it. And also they brought some kind of bread, and I tried to figure out what the bread was or a recipe for it, but I couldn't find it. But it was a very large, like almost pizza size, or maybe even larger, and very flat. And they would bring it to the table to platter and use like a wooden stick and kind of fold it over and bend it and whatever, and you just tore off a hunk and ate it. And it was very, very good. So that meal, even though I thought it wasn't going to be great, turned out to be very good. So this is the Liechtenstein sand grouse. You can see the little chicks. They were very newly hatched. With both the Liechtensteins and the chestnut-bellied sand grouse were seen the same day with chicks. Both the male and the female take care of the chicks. They incubate them and whatever, but they wander around just, and pretty much separately, but they mass together and move to a water site because they're usually not near water. So they'll fly both morning and evening to a site to get water. We watched the females come in one night, and they land away from the water, and then they kind of slowly creep up and drink their water and go. Another day, we were down by a stream, and the males were in the water getting their drinks, but they also have specialized feathers underneath them that are very fine. And they sit down in the water and they soak water up. And then when they fly back to the chicks drink that water from their breasts. So that's kind of an unusual thing for birds to do. After we were coming back from watching the birds and bird watching, of course, people were all lined up because we'd been there for quite a while. So there were lots of women and children and everything along the path. And I feel very sorry for the women in these countries that are not treated well. They work very hard. They have big families. I found conflicting numbers, but I'm thinking it's more like in the countryside. They have 5 to 7 children. They're living in these huts like we stayed in, which was not very comfortable. They're cooking, they're carrying the water. And so I smile or always try to greet the women and the children as I go by. And after I had done this, all of a sudden, the little girl in the middle came up to me, behind me, took my hand to walk with me. And it just tore at my heart because she was so sweet. And, that she apparently, because I had smiled at them, wanted to hold my hand and walk with me. So we weren't supposed to take pictures of people, but I was so taken by her that I talked to the driver and asked if it would be okay if I took their picture. So that was a very special time for me. I almost wanted to bring her home, but it wouldn't really be fair. So Pat had already shown the secretary bird. So one day we were out and there was a pair of secretary birds that had caught a very large snake. One of the birds was trying to eat it, but it was so long he couldn't swallow it. And half of it was still hanging on the ground. Meanwhile, some pair of tawny eagles moved in and they were trying to snake, but they weren't a lot of competition because these secretary birds are like 4 foot tall. And they typically, they have very strong feet and legs, so they stomp their prey to death. And meanwhile, some jackals arrived, a pair of jackals, and they got into the battle. And there was all this commotion going on. So we had a lot of fun watching them. In the end, the jackal ran off with the snake and the poor secretary bird lost his dinner. And then we'll go to so this was part of our group out watching one whole afternoon for the Dijibouti francolin. So we were just standing there and just nothing was happening. This went on for hours. And later I learned that apparently the Dijibouti francolin is really only active early in the morning, and the afternoons I go sit in trees. So I don't know if we were just relaxing or whatever, but they have a big area protected for the Dijibouti francolin, and it's fenced, but the locals open up the gates and let their animals in to browse. And so the juniper forests that they're dependent on are disappearing because of that. So the next morning we were up at the crack of dawn, although we had not really slept much in that little facility we had. We weren't even given pillows. We didn't even bother to undress. So as Pat said, the bird, they heard it call down in the fog. And the guide knew that I had trouble getting on birds because of my eyesight. So he gave me the scope and I'm standing there looking down in there. All I see is swirling fog. And several of the people are sure they see the bird. And I'm going, even if I saw it, what would it look like in swirling fog? So I was standing there going, okay, I'm not going to get this bird. I have to accept the fact, and this is going to be it. Well, then it started calling from further up to the left. So we all moved over there and we're looking and looking. And all of a sudden the guide grabbed me, pushed me to the edge of that rim. I swear my toes were hanging over the edge. I looked straight down and there the pair were right below us in good light. And they were hopping around and the male was trying to show interest and the female was just going, never mind. So anyway, we got pretty good looks, and off it went. And I could step back from the edge of the cliff and it's feeling much safer. So this is a greater honey guide. We've seen honey guides in other countries. This one was trying to call us to find that it knew where honey was. That's what they do. They've learned that if they take some animal or person to the hive, that you're likely to break into it. They eat beeswax, and they're one of the few birds that can digest beeswax, and the bee larvae. And sometimes the people have put up like wooden funny hives, and I'm sure they can't break into that. They can break into natural hives, and they'll do it like early in the morning. But what the birds do is come up and they make themselves very noticeable. They start calling, and then they try to fly away a bit, you know, like leading you to the thing. And it just kept repeating that. Of course, we had no interest in getting honey or taking the bird to it. But later I've learned that they're brood parasites. So that, you know, at first I was thinking, well, that's really cool and everything. But I'm not so happy about them destroying other eggs. So they'll go lay the egg in another nest. They will sometimes break the host nest egg, or if they don't, when the chicks hatch, they have kind of like a little sharp point on their beaks that they kill the nestlings with. So they're related to woodpeckers, which is something I hadn't known. And then this dark chanting goshawk we saw several places, but the one day we were driving along and one of a goshawk came along, attacked two chickens. And it apparently kind of grabbed one of them, but when the bus was there, it apparently startled them, and all three birds, you know, just froze. Pretty soon, the one chicken that had been partially grasped ran away. Meanwhile, the other one went across the front of the bus and went off running faster than I've ever seen any chicken. It was like the cartoons. It looked like its legs were spinning like little wheels. It was running as far as I could see off into the distance. And so we were all pretty much laughing about the funny bird. And then we're back to the Rospoli's Turahu. It was my favorite bird of the whole trip, and you can understand why. They have special green pigments and red pigments in their feathers that no other birds have. And the red feathers are underneath, they're the primaries of their wings. So when they fly, this red flash just explodes into color. I tried to find a good picture of them flying, but I couldn't find one that on the internet that I liked. They also have a fourth toe on the rear of their foot, and that toe can move side to side or front to back or whatever, and that helps them because they don't fly a lot. They tend to just hop from tree to trees. They eat fruit, and I love the orange eyelashes. And this was a life bird for me, the Nile Valley sunbird. It's kind of the hummingbird of the old world. They pollinate and they eat nectar, and they're usually very colorful. The males are jewel colors, and the females are just kind of a drab gray or greenish color. And then the Abyssinian roller, again, when they fly, the color is just like patterned almost like the hoopoo. It just radiates everywhere, and they're called rollers because when they fly, they kind of roll and do other things. They're not threatened at all because they've really learned to adapt to being around people. The Abyssinian longclaw was another one of my favorite birds, and it kind of reminded me of a meadowlark. They have, the reason they're called longclaws is because they have the back hind toe is very long, which helps them walk on grass. And then I'm always interested in plants as well, which sometimes gets me into trouble, but This milkweed I've seen in other parts of Africa as well, and it's really tall. It's about 4 foot tall. And here's another one. It gets the big fruit, and that's what gives it its name. One of the reasons that it's not eaten is that it's toxic. So that seems like Africa has a lot of plants, and they only exist either because of the toxins or the thorns. This was a really beautiful, it's called Ethiopian desert rose, but it's not really a rose at all. It's related to oleanders, and they have very thick stems to them, and then these pretty flowers, and they're actually cultivated and even sold in the US. And this little flower I could not identify, but it was the tiniest little flower. The bloom looked a little bit like an iris, and I really don't think that the leaves that are shown are really its leaves. I think that it just was not eaten because it was next to thorns. And the acacia whistling thorn, there are 4 species of stinging ants that associate with these. So it's a symbiotic thing. The acacia puts off kind of a honey type product that the ants like. And then it will protect the plant. So if you touch the tree or a giraffe or something tries to eat it, all these stinging ants go after whatever it is, so they're left alone. And the reason they're called whistling is because the ants put a little hole in those little bulbs, and when the winds blow over it, makes a whistling sound. It's another form of an acacia. This one I had no idea what it was, but I liked it. And this one was growing at the really tall elevations where the gelada was. And I think it's probably a type of heather or heath, just by the way the plants looked when I was there. And this is the end. And I just thought I would wrap up with the fact that Ethiopia had 882 species of birds with 19 endemics, and Djibouti had 387 species with 1 endemic, but they have several near endemics, or ones that are easier to be seen there. So in total, I saw 566 species and 113 live birds.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was and I noticed when I was going through my notes that by the time I hit to Djibouti, there are no real little special notes in my book. I was just surviving at that point. In fact, I spent, when we hit the US, we were in California, and I knew we wouldn't get home in time to make a phone call. So I was on the phone trying to find a quiet place to call the doctor's office, making appointments for both Pat and I for the next day. So anyway, thank you.
I think we have time for a few questions if there are any.
How long was your trip?
Well, the dates were on the first slide. I don't know.
4 weeks.
About 4 weeks. And the last 3 weeks I was sick. Diagnosis pneumonia when I got home. That's one thing we complained to Rock Jumper about is the bus. They would not turn on the air conditioning, or it didn't work or something. We never understood. And the roads were so dusty that if you weren't in the driver's seat or the first row, you were getting the window open. It's dusty. And it was just terrible. And it was 85 or 90 degrees, so you couldn't really wear a mask very easily. But at any rate, any other questions?
Did you get bed bugs?
I'm sorry?
Did you get bed bugs?
No, we didn't. But I know why you're asking. I mean, it's pretty common in the world to do that, even in modern hotels.
On the trip did go home with bed bugs. Yes.
So in the beginning, are they Eastern Orthodox or? what
Yeah, okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Yes, that's what is generally called as Coptic Christianity, the Eastern Orthodox, if you will. Now, after Christ died, the apostles went all over, and the Eastern took off right away. The Western Roman area was illegal. So the Western didn't grow very much. The Eastern grew really quickly. So Ethiopia in early 4th century adopted it as a state religion, one of the first countries to ever do that. And so these churches, these countries, their country has been Christian for, well, since the 3rd or 4th century, probably. Now, King Lilibela was a Christian, and he had even traveled to Jerusalem, which is kind of mind-boggling to me, traveling in that era, but he did. And in 1186, the Moors took over Jerusalem, and he was upset. So that's part of the reason he started these churches in Lalibela, was to create a new Jerusalem of some sort. I don't know if it was related to the way the churches are laid out, or just the number of churches, or a pilgrimage site, or what. But anyway, that's what he wanted to do. And I think that the Christianity is why they were never colonized. Formal government with one religion for the most part at that time. And this was a cohesive help to manage the people to fight the invaders. Italy tried at least twice to take over Ethiopia and were beaten back by the Ethiopian army. So they were trying to colonize it, but never got it done. Questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I like that you always not only show us the birds, but you talk about the culture. And we always learn something when Pat and Joann give their talks. 11 times now, or was this the 12th?
No, I think this was the 11th.
Very good. Thank you so much. And when I was telling about all of Pat's volunteerism, I forgot to say that he has also been the leader of a sector for Christmas bird count. How many years did you do?
No, I had to drop out a couple years ago, so I think we did it probably 10 or 12 years.
10 or 12 years of that. So he has put in a lot of time for Salem Audubon. Thank you. Thank you both.
Sharon.